Kyle Dubas fired. Let's look at the top 5 worst trades or worst moves in Kyle Dubas' tenure as general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. As I said, it'll be trades, but there's a couple moves in here that are not trades. I'm going to do some honorable mentions, and feel free to comment down below some moves that I didn't include or some decisions that I did not include. If you're a new subscriber, welcome. Drop a like, notification bell, all that good stuff. Kyle Dubas. There's some moves in here, and before we get to the top 5 of the worst moves, I do think Kyle Dubas drastically improved the drafting. He did make a lot of good moves. But one of the worst things he did was the contract negotiations over the Big Four specifically. And I was one of the many that were so hyped when John Tavares signed with the Toronto Maple Leafs. But specifically with Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews. We're in a debacle right now because Austin Matthews, instead of like Connor McDavid, signing an 8-year deal, this garbage 4 or 5 year stuff that they just gave into. And now Matthews is going through the exact same thing, wanting a 4 or 5 year deal. It's just, and guy has a lot more leverage now instead of when he was coming out of his entry level deal. So that's a huge, huge miss. And it's so ironic that how Kyle Dubas got let go here over a contract negotiation and offering up, asking for more money is exactly how he goes when that's exactly what he allowed with his big stars that he stuck by. Again, I have total respect for Kyle Dubas, but that's garbage. Complete garbage. Not re-signing Zach Hyman, all right? I look at the situation, and you're going to get to it. Nazem Kadri, we're going to talk about it. Having Kerfoot on that $3.5 per million deal is another part of why the Leafs did not bring back Zach Hyman. And I understand the no movement clause. I understand these things. But a long-term deal, Zach Hyman at $5 million would have still looked nice for these next 2 years, all right? Again, if you're in the win now mode, you're in the win now mode. You're not worried about what's happening 6, 7 years from now. If you're in win now, you're in win now. Another one I got to add to here because I think when you look at it, it wasn't necessarily, I would say, like a brutal miss at the time. And it wasn't a miss, I would say, for a while. But now looking back in hindsight, the Jake Muzzin trade. I mean, when you look at it, a first-round pick, Sean Durzi, Carl Grundstrom, that's a lot to give up for Jake Muzzin, who was huge for the Leafs. Don't get me wrong. And again, I backed that move when it happened. So I'm not saying at the time it was this brutal move. But looking back, those are some major pieces. Bjorn Foote was the guy that they drafted. The Kings drafted the first-round pick. So you're missing out on 2 younger defensemen and Carl Grundstrom, who could provide you some bite in the bottom 6 for Muzzin, he's not going to play hockey again, which is super sad. So that's just another one. So let's go to the 5 worst moves from Kyle Dubas in his tenure. Coming in at number 5, again, it didn't start off from his fault, but Lou Lamoriello, once upon a time, signed Patrick Marleau to a 3-year, $6.25 per contract. And on the 3rd year, instead of just riding it out, I know Patty Marleau was a problem at that point, and he couldn't provide in the top 6 at that age. But the fact that Kyle Dubas traded a first-round pick that became Seth Jarvis, and now Seth Jarvis is in the playoffs in the Eastern Conference Final with the Carolina Hurricanes, ripping it up, and he's going to have a great NHL career. And Kyle Dubas said, we're tossing that first-round pick to get rid of 1 year of Patrick Marleau because we're ready to win now. Fast forward to 2023, and they still haven't won. They won 1 game in round 2. And Kyle Dubas traded that first-round pick. Again, that was a Lou Lamoriello problem. So if you're talking about Lou Lamoriello's worst trades or worst decisions as a Toronto Maple Leaf GM, that's up there. Signing Patty Marleau to the 3 years, brutal. Absolutely brutal. Seth Jarvis could be a Toronto Maple Leaf. At number 4, and you know what? This isn't a trade. This is a move. This is a decision. But one of the worst I've ever seen. The Toronto Maple Leafs traded Philip Hollander and a 7th-round pick to the Pittsburgh Penguins for Jared McCann. And the strategy was, and Shanahan, hey, it's in the video, Shanahan agreed with it, so this is part Shanny too, that, we'll trade for Jared McCann, but we'll expose him to Seattle. So they'll take Jared McCann, and we can keep Kerfoot and, wait for it, Justin Hall. The Toronto Maple Leafs traded for and let go of Jared McCann so they could protect Justin freaking Hall. That is one of the worst things I've ever seen. Again, Justin Hall, you know the agenda's there, but that is one of the worst things I've ever seen. Jared McCann, top liner now for the Seattle Kraken. He still would have been a top 6 left winger. And look, Matthew Nyes tried to come in and save the day. I love Matty Nyes, and he was doing great. but to rely on Matty Nyes as your best left winger. You could have had Jared McCann, Dubas. Number 3, looking at the Leafs trading Mason Marchman for Dennis Malgin. They traded Marchman for Malgin. At the time, Marchman was with the Toronto Marlies, wasn't showing a lot, but that size, 6'4", 6'5", a guy that presence, even on the 4th line, you just didn't have that on the roster, and you trade for a 5'9", 5'10" guy in Dennis Malgin. At the time, I wasn't overreacting because Marchman hadn't showed much. But the Leafs, they have a lot of money. Like, they have a lot of scouts. That should have been determined that the guy would have been a good presence, at least in the bottom 6. Obviously, he ends up contributing now in top 9 roles and is in, again, the conference finals. Another guy connected to the Leafs. Number freaking 2, and this one is, this one is, to me, the worst in a way, but I'll leave the worst one to the last because it was just, we'll debate in the comments which one's the actual worst. But at number 2, Nick Foligno to the Toronto Maple Leafs. And the Leafs trade a 1st-round pick and 2 4th-round picks. Nick Foligno does nothing, gets hurt, does nothing against Montreal, and the Leafs obviously blow a 3-1 lead. That one I can say is the worst because of the circumstances of number 1. The circumstances of number 1 because of somebody that got suspended in back-to-back playoffs, and Dubas felt the pressure to make the move. At the time, I was okay with the move, and I'll own that. I was okay with the move. I thought it was a good change of scenery. I thought Tyson Barrie was going to be good in the top 4 for the Leafs. Obviously, I was wrong. So, if anything, I'm marking it down as this was just the worst in general because Leaf fans were emotional, but we're allowed to be emotional. General manager for the Toronto Maple Leafs should not be emotional. They should not act emotionally. And Dubas has obviously learned over the years, but back then, guy didn't know. So, Nick Foligno for a 1st and 2 4ths, garbage trade, and I would argue it's the worst one in Dubas' tenure. But this one, looking at hindsight now, Nazem Kadri to the Avalanche, Tyson Barrie and Kerfoot in, and as I said, there's a domino effect with the Kerfoot thing from not being able to re-sign Zach Hyman or not choosing to re-sign Zach Hyman to freaking the expansion draft conversation to just a bunch of stuff. Kerfoot being in the top 6. Kerf seems like a nice guy, but that created a huge domino effect, and Tyson Barrie was just a waste of time here in Toronto. Just good buddies with Beebs and Matthews. Oh, what a time. And Nazem Kadri, just the freaking nail in the coffin. Guy wins a Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche and just sticks it to all the haters on national television. And that is why that is the worst move in the Kyle Dubas tenure with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Sorry, guys, for the shaky phone, but I just want to be authentic here, you know? Some people, hey, sometimes I just sit down and we're showing emotion here. Kyle Dubas has done his GM. I had to rant out the worst moves in Kyle Dubas' tenure. So give me your thoughts, guys, in the comments. Subscribe, like, notification bell, all that good stuff. And give me your thoughts on Kyle Dubas' time as GM. And yeah, lots more videos to come. Cheers.